Welcome. It's very nice to see everyone here today, to the folks in the room and the folks online. The event is being streamed to the Interdisciplinary Forum class, which is the class by Dr. Shirley Mather, the Dean of the School of Graduate Studies. We send in thanks. He's currently in Calgary, so could not be here today. But his many relationships that he nurtures inside and outside of the university make events like this one possible. Tonight, our event partner is the Onsite Gallery, who are offering a special presentation of curator Eunice and Joséphine Denis. I've had the pleasure to work with Susan Jama to produce the event, and I'm going to hand it over to her for our land acknowledgement and a more fulsome introduction.
Thank you, Horace. Hi and welcome, and thank you for joining us today despite the beautiful winter day we're having. But it is what it is. So before I begin introducing tonight's event as well as myself, I do want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge our lovely, awesome ASL interpreters who are here with us today. Interpreting is Amelia, and next to Amelia, sitting on the chair, is Nancy. So thank you both. So my name is Susan Jama, and I'm the Programs and Community Coordinator at Onsite Gallery. Again, today's lecture is titled Handle with Care, Curatorial Practices After the Pandemic, with our guest lecturer, Eunice, and later on we will have a Q&A session with Joséphine. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Onsite Gallery at OCAD University is situated in Tech Toronto, Turtle Island. Onsite Gallery and OCAD University acknowledge the ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishpac, and the Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we work, stand, and create in. We also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers and migrants, either in this generation or generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge our supporters. Onsite Gallery is generously supported by the Delaney family. We also acknowledge support from the Canada Council of the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, and Nexus. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Ryan Rice, Executive Director and Curator of Indigenous Art at Onsite Gallery.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome everyone here tonight. As Susan said, my name is Ryan Rice. I'm the Executive Director and Curator of Indigenous Art at Onsite Gallery. I hope you visit us frequently for our exhibitions, our programs, and just to remind you, all our events are free. So please take advantage of what we offer here at OCAD University through Onsite Gallery. I'm happy you have joined us for Onsite Gallery's annual Black History Month guest curatorial lecture featuring esteemed curator Eunice bélidor. Many people have emailed me tonight in the afternoon asking if it's live streamed, if it's being recorded. So across Canada, many people wanted to join us. So you're lucky to be here in person tonight, and I'm lucky to have Eunice here with us. Tonight's lecture is co-presented with the Center for the Study of Black Canadian Diaspora and Black Artists Networks in Dialogue Gallery, Van Gallery, to highlight and advance the vital role of fostering dialogues on Black history, art, and culture within and beyond our communities. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the OCAD University graduate students and staff who are sharing their seminar space with us tonight. So thank you for all being part of this as part of your class, as your seminar. I also want to thank Onsite Gallery staff Susan Jama and Keisa Smith for their support, our gallery monitors, Lion, Jay, Victor, Jordan, Zanya, and Zena, and Leslie Aston Hurst, who is coordinating the reception following the lecture. Now I would like to introduce our guest. Eunice Bélidor is an independent curator, researcher, art critic, and writer whose work explores the intersections of care, feminism, and racial issues through curating and writing. Holding an MA in art history with a graduate diploma in curatorial studies from York University, where her research was focused on the curation of contemporary Haitian art in international exhibitions post-2010 earthquake in Haiti. Her curatorial and academic interests span affective theory, letter writing, contemporary Haitian art, and design. Topics she has presented on at many academic conferences and institutions, and we are very excited to have her here tonight. She has curated exhibitions nationally and internationally at venues such as the Galerie de l'UQAM, Spike Berlin, Articule, and the FOFA Gallery, where she was the director and is currently stepping in to help them right now to go through a transition, which is at Concordia University, and where she has also explored innovative online curatorial practices. Her writing has appeared in publications including the Brooklyn Rail, Hyperallergic, Canadian Art, and the Inuit Art Quarterly. A recipient of an Emerging Curator Award from the Nitition Foundation, Eunice has held curatorial and administrative roles in major Canadian institutions, including the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal. Tonight's lecture, titled Handle with Care, Curatorial Practices After the Pandemic, will explore critical questions such as, what does it mean to curate with care in a world facing conflicts, wars, and genocide? Who and what do curatorial practices care for? From her perspective and lived experience, Eunice will share strategies employed by curators, including herself, such as archiving and radical hospitality, to create meaningful and relevant exhibitions that nurture all participants, curators, artists, and audiences alike. Please join me in welcoming Eunice Bélidor.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you for presenting me in such a beautiful way. I did not expect it. Thank you to all the team. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for everyone for bringing me here. I will veer off script. Usually when I hear a land acknowledgement, I use that opportunity to acknowledge the land I am standing on myself. And I used to live in Toronto 10 years ago and had no idea about the treaties and the purchase that happened on this land, but I was roaming freely as an uninvited guest in Toronto. So I want to acknowledge now that I will keep knowing this history and learning from it and navigating Toronto knowing this history as well. So thank you very much, Susan, for making the acknowledgement. All right. Okay. So my husband always teases me about the term curare, from which the word curating comes from. He uses it with his most 19th century Latin accent to emphasize how curating derives from the notion of caring for objects. It is therefore implied that curators are caregivers, historically for art objects, as well as artifacts, and more recently of ideas, concepts, and artists. When the word, written the same way, is pronounced in French, it has a completely different meaning. Curare becomes curar and is a poison. In many instances, especially for Black, Indigenous, and curators of color, the job of curator can become poisonous, as there have been many reported instances of disrespect, dismissal, and abuse in the workplaces where we have been hired during the pandemic. The early stages of the pandemic also coincided with movements such as Black Lives Matter and Me Too, and art institutions realized that their hiring practices were part of the problem. It was also a period of deep questioning for art workers. With the closure of galleries, museums, and art centers, what could we do and how could we work? How are we going to make money? Yes, how are we going to make money? So the lack of social gathering forced us into more intimate connections with the artists and curators we worked with. We got to know each other in other ways than through our respective art practices. Beautiful projects emerged during that time. As the director of the FOFA Gallery, I started to support artists through a letter writing project where they were invited to dream of the future of arts after the pandemic. I started this project as I was questioning the possibilities of curating without an exhibition space, as well as trying to understand how a curator and a gallery director could continue to support and care for artists when we cannot work together or present their work, which was the way I was caring for them at the time. Marie-Hélène Leblanc from the Galerie de Lucot did a similar project where she invited artists, curators, and arts workers to write letters to reflect together about the current times. They stopped their programming for a year to build on what they've learned through these letters. It was her way to prepare for better institutional care once the pandemic was going to end. What about now? How can curatorial practice continue to care for art objects, artifacts, but also ideas, concepts, and artists? And more importantly, how can curating care for curators? In this lecture, I will share exhibitions and projects I have found to be great examples of what I define as caring practices. I will also share some of my work, as I describe my own curatorial practice as one rooted in care. Hopefully you will challenge these notions during the Q&A, which will allow me to push this idea further. Before delving into examples, I want to highlight the values that are important to me and my practice, which have guided the creation of this lecture. Friendship, hospitality, care, beauty, kink, anti-capitalism, independence, and domesticity. They will not be detailed in bullet points in this lecture, but will be the red thread that connects everything I will be talking about and everything you will eventually find out if this lecture makes you curious to know more about me. The first project I want to present is the podcast, The Conversations That Carry Us, created and hosted by Montreal-based curator Geneviève Wallen. Geneviève Wallen was supposed to be here in conversation with me tonight, but being very pregnant and very round, she had to stay home tonight. Geneviève is an award-winning independent curator, writer, researcher, and workshop facilitator. Her practice is rooted here in Toronto and in Montreal as well. Her curatorial and administrative work is informed by intersectional feminism, intergenerational dialogues, and BIPOC platforms offering alternatives to neoliberal definitions of care. Her ongoing curatorial explorations include the practice of gift giving, carving space for unfinished thoughts, and musings on the intersection of longevity and pleasure. Geneviève often works in collaboration, notably with the Toronto-based collective YTB. Her podcast is a series of conversations aiming to democratize curatorial knowledge and provide broader access to curatorial thinking. Each discussion teases out ongoing conversations circulating in the field as we collectively investigate the socio-economic conditions and ethics informing our practice. This podcast is a great example of care practice in curating. As we curators often work alone, each episode highlights care strategies to strengthen solid support networks for guidance. Geneviève also understands that we learn as we go and that each exhibition and collaboration provide a better understanding of institutional politics and relational boundaries. Even if each episodes cover different aspects of curating, care is always present. In the episode Curating as a Repeating Practice, Dr. Andrea Fatona sees her practice of making exhibitions as generating new knowledges to create a feedback loop between the person engaging in the exhibition, the artists, and her curating. In that sense, her exhibition making practice keeps on carrying beyond the exhibition walls, as the public can bring with them what they've learned from the exhibition in their own environments, disseminate this knowledge, which keeps on highlighting the artist's works, the curatorial work, and their understanding of what they have seen. Geneviève and Andrea's conversation also put forward ways in which Black people have always made exhibitions rooted in care because we understand the anti-Black exclusion that the contemporary living artists we are working with are subjected to, and by curating them is a care for our own community. In the episode Dreaming Together, Geneviève discusses with Camille Larrivé, executive and artistic director of the MAI in Montreal. They talk about how you can learn from your previous experiences, professional or otherwise, to evolve. How our experiences are self-generated knowledge and how it has as much value as the knowledge that we learn in academic settings. People we surround ourselves with and people we work with influence our work and practice. Camille mentions how their work must be anchored in the way they live as well as the way they want to live. Their curatorial activism focuses on going against institutional mainstream values that they have to uphold in their own work, such as rigidity, immediacy, and capitalism. Creating spaces for conviviality, discovery, and nourishment is, although not recognized as part of actual curatorial work, is definitely a part of the way we do the work. Through her work with the podcast, The Conversations That Carry Us, Geneviève not only provides care to her guests by giving them a platform to share knowledge and practice in ways that are different from exhibition making or sharing ideas through the artist's works, which is usually how we do the work. The podcast is also recorded in English and French for accessibility, and she also gives cares to her listeners by presenting a wide variety of practices. Each episode title also unravels the different practices of curating, as well as aspects of curatorial work that is often unspoken of, like Living Spaces with Dominique Fontaine, The Transparency That Helps All of Us with Gendai, There Is No Magic Formula in Curating with Pamela Edmonds, and Should I Stay or Should I Go with Alisa Farron. The podcast is available online and I highly recommend you listen to it. So speaking of Camille, we have a history of working together. We first met in 2014. It was my second shift at Articule, the Artist Run Center in Montreal, where that was my first job in the arts. And Camille was the leader of a project called Decolonizing Street Art, Anti-Colonial Street Artist Convergence, which was an event that brought together artists, street artists of indigenous and settler origins, and built an artistic community of shared anti-colonial values. The convergence promoted a type of street art that advocated the decolonization of Turtle Island and reminded Montrealers of the city's colonial past and present. The artists living across the Canadian and American states already focused part of their work on issues related to Indigenous resistance, such as environmental struggles against pipelines and mining, and justice for missing and murdered Native women. As part of this convergence, Camille was hosting a film screening happening at Articule, and ever since that moment, we've had an ongoing conversation, um, and we kept inviting each other to collaborate in different events. And even in the podcast episode with Geneviève, Camille speaks of a collaboration that we did together. We wrote an article together for a publication in Montreal. So when they were appointed as executive and artistic director of the MAI, they chose to invite me as their guest curator for the 2023-24 programming year. I do not shy away from saying that when I received that invitation from Camille, it was like I had been lifted off the grave that the museum work had dug for me the years before. Working as a curator with the MAI last year was my first curatorial opportunity since decided to work as an independent curator. Back then, I had no income and no work prospects, but I was highly exposed due to an article that went viral in which I told what had happened to me at my previous very high-profile job. Extending care to curators by being transparent about what I had lived is still something that I'm paying for today, not able to get a steady job ever since. Camille offered me a platform to do my work the way I wanted to make it, a real carte blanche. They invited me well enough in advance that I could think of what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, and how I could use my own curatorial strategies to share knowledge in as many ways as I could. As a curator, I view exhibition making as a writing exercise. I think of an idea, and the artists I collaborate with become the words that form a sentence, constructing definitions and knowledge. When I began contemplating the exhibition Traces That Remain, I knew I wanted to express what I was experiencing. I had been suffering from burnout for a year, and although I managed to pick myself up and heal on my own with the help of my dog Dilla, I, I still faced lasting damage and after effects that were challenging to quantify and not physically apparent. It was crucial for me to use my own experience to illustrate how many artists confronted similar challenges, even if their experiences were not identical to mine. I immediately thought of artist Po B.K. Lomami and on/indisciplinary artists and a public and cultural programmer whom I met in 2017. We were both working at artist-run centers, and since we were the only Black workers in that regroupement, we definitely acknowledged one another. In addition to being a cultural worker, Po has a performance art practice. During our discussions, which were surprisingly unrelated to our workplace trauma, Po described their performance work as an intervention practice. In performance, it is often the action and movements that are documented and archived. However, how does one document an intervention? You might photograph the artist performing the intervention, but that does not archive the action or the purpose of the intervention. So this conversation sparked my desire to create an exhibition focused on archiving affective, emotional, and invisible memories that have a lasting impact on our lives. With that in mind, I decided to make the exhibition a space where I would honor the conversation I've had with artists with whom we had this topic in common, who also talked about archives, memories, feelings, as well as struggles, silencing, and grief. In 2023, I had a studio visit with Shaya Ishak, who at the time lived in Outremont, which is the neighborhood adjacent to the Myland where I used to live. I met Shaya completely randomly in Ottawa in 2021 when I was sitting on a jury with the National Gallery, and she had the exhibition The Library of Infinities exhibited at Saw Gallery at the same time. Realizing we lived so close, we promised to see each other again. I use quotation mark when I talk of the studio visit because at the time, Shaya's work was not housed in a studio, and what she wanted to show me was on her computer. So I invited her over to the fabulous loft that I used to live, that some people can testify they have been there, to discuss and look at her work on her computer, as well as have some dog therapy with Della roaming around us and providing her with a toy to play with occasionally. In our conversation, Shaya was talking about wanting to animate a piece of weaving that she had previously made as a way to explore the liminality of rites of passage. She was talking about how her weaving practice was passed down to her from previous generations. She views weaving as an archive of knowledge and intergenerational conversations and relations. When ideas started to form in my head about making an exhibition about archives, I wanted to honor and highlight the way Shaya was thinking about it. I thought about Traces That Remain as a two-person exhibition for a while. Then I visited Toronto in the spring of 2023 when I was invited to take part in the York University Summer Institute with Natasha Bissonnot and Tamer El Sheikh. I took the opportunity to see friends and visit artists that I had previously worked with and with whom I maintained a friendly relationship. I visited Zinia Nagvi's photo installation at Whippersnapper. There, she presented The Professor's Desk, a project which paired documents from Asian Canadian Labour Alliance from their archives within the frame of a professor's office. The project looked particularly at 4 cases of discrimination on or relating to Canadian universities, but one really stood out for me. Professor Kin Yip Chun's case of racial discrimination against the University of Toronto. The project put together material from these events within the artist's studio/office. In doing so, Nagvi considered how institutions have or have not chosen to support visible minorities within the frame of academia. It was intended to honor the legacy of a professor who had spoken out publicly about their experience and consider how Chun has made space for future Black, Indigenous, and racialized workers within academic institutions. Not only did this project hit very close to home, but the way Zinia staged the photograph was such a diligent and truthful display of the impact systemic racism has on our personal lives. I asked her on the spot if she wanted to be part of the exhibition, and she said yes. In the same trip to Toronto, I paid a visit to Lanne Florency, with whom I also previously worked, and who has since moved away from Montreal to pursue their practice. They live here now. What I always like to talk about with Lanne is how much Montrealers we are, and even if we're one generation apart, we talk about our city the same way. During our visit, they showed me what they were experimenting with, looking at different ways to install their work, their textile work, but it was the personal conversations we had that stuck with me the most. Talking about tattoos, relationships, familial issues, homemaking, and homebreaking. Our conversation came back with me in residency in Saint-Jean-Port-Joli when I was at the time and kept filling my head and heart space. 2 weeks after our studio visit, I invited them to be part of the show as well. Making Traces That Remain is a great example of how I do not select works or artists that merely serve the theme of the exhibition I am working on. I make exhibitions that honor conversation I've had with artists around me, highlighting how, if we are all connected differently around similar ideas, it will keep expanding with the public viewing the exhibition. When I curate, I show how I am part of an ecosystem that involves more than myself and the artists, but also the building which houses the exhibition, the people working there, the public seeing the exhibition, and the ideas forming in the public when they leave the show. When Camille gave me carte blanche at the Maille, I was invited to use not only the exhibition space that you see here, but they also have a cafe bar and they have a theater space. I pondered about how I could broaden my curatorial practice to more than exhibition making. I decided to use the theater space as an actual theater where I presented Nakita FK's film Miss Nothing That Flies or Swims. And it was presented the same way as you would go to a theater. There were like screening hours. You could, like, we even asked Nakita if there was a snack they wanted to provide to the public. Nakita is a multidisciplinary artist who lives and works between Montreal and Chicago, where they are currently doing their MFA. And they created this film while on residency at the Matapedia train station, hosted by the Darling Foundry. In the fall preceding their departure to Gaspésie, we had spent many afternoons writing grants, eating cookies, talking about service tops and rope bottoms, and imagining what a life as an independent curator could look like for me. Not only was their presence in my first opportunity as an independent curator important for me, but Traces That Remain was the first time that they had most recently created, that the film that they had most recently created was screened, which as an artist is not something that happens often. It can take months, even years to present projects that we're working on if it's not a commission piece. Also, this film is also was also fun for me to curate because in this film, Nakita is looking through telegrams and postcards that they have found in the Matapedia train station and through the discoveries that they have made in, in the content of the correspondence. They were able to trace the history, the colonial history of the fishing village of Matapedia. And right now I'm doing curatorial research where I use letter writing as a way to unearth affective archives from curatorial practice. And this film kind of proved my point. So their film opened in the middle of the exhibition. And the opening of the film was centered around a performance dinner party I had co-curated with Marie Ségolène Brault. Marie is the owner and founder of Espace Maurice, an at-home private gallery in Montreal. She is also a performance artist who works with food, drinks, and hospitality. We were the perfect pair to make the performance These Traces Will Remain, a performative dinner centered around radical hospitality, which is a way of gathering in which all participants actively contribute food, ideas, energy, and love to the community to create an inclusive and equitable space. The goal of the dinner was not only to be the opening of the film, but it was also a way to thank Camille and the team at the Maille for offering their space to all of us. Each team member's expertise was offered with care to me and all of the invited artists. None of us had ever worked in such a friendly way and caring condition. We invited a chef, a sommelier, the exhibited artist, the Maille team, and poets Marie-Lou Craft and Assia Jamila Touré to offer their words to the guests. After this experience, I decided that the way I worked on traces, the way I forged collaborations, the different curatorial practices involved in the making of exhibitions will always be the guideline with which I will do my work in the future. Highlighting artistic practices or conversations or friendship, as well as nourishing my own thoughts and processes are on the cheat sheet to make my work relevant and caring. The last exhibition projects I want to talk about in this lecture was made by another friend of mine, Dr. Johanna Joachim. Johanna, Geneviève, and I are part of an informal curatorial collective in Montreal that took its roots from the friendships or mentors Gaëtan Vernat, Julie Crooks, Pamela Edmonds and Dominique Fontaine had amongst themselves and was the booster behind the Black Curators Forum, a gathering of around 20 Black curators, writers, academics, and art workers from across North America that happened here in 2019. I had met Joanna back in 2016 when she came with artist Shauna Strauss at Articule to ask about membership. We kept seeing each other at various events around the city. It is when she started working as a curator at Artext that we started talking even more. She had invited me to write on their blog and was working with art plus feminism to create Wikipedia pages for Black artists and curators who did not have their own page. Surprisingly, when I discovered I had a Wikipedia page, she said she had nothing to do with it. Joanna is currently Assistant Professor of Black Studies in Art History and Social Justice at Concordia University. In 2024, she curated the exhibition Estuaries at Owens Art Gallery in Sackville, New Brunswick. Estuaries was an exhibition musing on Black diasporic people's relationship to the ocean. It used as an anchor the legacies of white settler civic leaders and entrepreneurs like John Owens, Robert Reed, and John Hammond, who, through their involvement in the connected industries of shipbuilding, trade, processing of raw materials, and the funds they generated, profited from the stolen labor and disenfranchisement of Black people. The exhibition featured artworks by both contemporary and historical artists, archival documents, and artifacts to contend with the tension that arises once we allow the freshwater river of Canadian history to meet the ocean of Black Atlantic life. Through this exhibition, Joanna has made something I have found difficult in my own curatorial career. By taking works from the Owens Art Gallery collection out of the vault to exhibit, she engaged in the historical curatorial care, which is to curate as conservation, associated with museum curators who care for artworks by preserving them. However, she juxtaposed these works with contemporary practices from Black artists across Canada. Sculptures, paintings, films, and photographs by Denise Ferreira da Silva and Arjuna Newman, Sylvia D. Hamilton, John Hammond, Oduche, Camille Turner, and Denis Tomasos and Gary Weeks shared the space with historical paintings by John Hammond, who helped to develop a teaching collection now housed and cared for at the Owens Art Gallery. In her conversation with Sylvia Hamilton and Tendiwe McCarthy, they discussed witnessing Black Canadian history happening in real time in their work, in their teachings, and their professional experiences. Estuaries became a conduit for caring for a Black history that has often, if not always, been erased, as well as caring for the Black Canadians whose history was being told through the exhibition. Joanna earned her PhD in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies and at the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies at McGill University, working under the supervision of Dr. Charmaine Nelson. Her SSHRC-funded doctoral work, Then, There, Then, Here, Now, Black Women's Hair and Dress in the French Empire, examined the visual culture of self-preservation and self-care through the lens of creolization, as well as historical and contemporary art practices. It therefore makes complete sense for her curatorial practice to look at historical art and contemporary art as being part of the same history, especially through the lens of historical Black art/Black art history. Estuaries is a clear demonstration of how exhibition making can care for one's own research, interest, and as well as care for artifacts and objects. Before Estuaries, another groundbreaking exhibition from Joanna was Black Kitty, a project that delineated the trajectory of contemporary Black Canadian art as witnessed by art text collection between the 70s and 2010s. The exhibition gathered key moments and people to consider the thematic, aesthetic, or conceptual threads linking them. By placing these documents in relation with one another, Joanna began to trace a temporal cartography of Black Canadian art history. The exhibition was presented both at Artex and online. The digital space was conceptualized as a companion to the physical exhibition, offering a glimpse into the Black Canadian art milieu beyond the borders of Artex collection. Joanna's curatorial practice does more than caring for a Black audience, who often do not see themselves represented in the arts and culture in Canada. Joanna anchors Blackness in Canadian art history as something that is not exceptional or segregated, but rather as showing it has always been part of the larger Canadian context, as a continuum rather than something sporadic and punctual. To conclude this lecture, I want to take the time to talk about another care practice of mine, which has been weaving. I started weaving in the spring of 2023. I was the writer in residence at Es Nord-Est in Saint-Jean-Port-Joli. So the letter writing project I'm telling you I'm researching on, I started researching it when I was on residency there. Es Nord-Est has been devoted to creating a place that encourages artists and authors involved in the broad field of visual arts to engage in reflection about art. The center recognizes the importance of the creative process in contemporary art practices and wishes to foster this process without an imperative for dissemination. They offer space for production, research and creation, and time for free experimentation outside of an exhibition context in order to open the way to new creative territories. The setting is beautiful. It is close to the river, the live-work studios are gorgeous and spacious, and the 4 artists that I was in residency with ended up being great friends. While in residency, I was doing a lot of research and writing, and figuring out a writing routine I could carry with me from then on. However, I was in my head a lot, and I needed to do something completely different so I could get more from my time away from home. I am a big advocate of the importance of physical activity for mental health, but I was already doing that. What could I do that would also make me get to know Saint-Jean-Port-Joli better? I got a membership at the Cercle des Fermières, where I took a quilting class and a weaving class. I made a dish towel, hung out with elderly women who knew so much about their little town, as well as knitting, quilting, weaving, and sewing. During the pandemic, while I was making studio visits, I noticed many artists returning to artisanal ancestral practices. Several of them inherited looms from their grandmothers and incorporated weaving into their work. I was intrigued to see how the pandemic prompted people to embrace slower practices and connect with their family histories in a tactile manner. As the loom is the first computer, and the research surrounding that idea was captivating, when I had the chance to learn the skill, I eagerly embraced it. Not just to escape my thoughts and engage my hands, but to gain a deeper understanding of the artists I collaborate with, converse with, and contemplate alongside. I recently wove a rug and became fully absorbed in the project, finding a reprieve from my workload and an upcoming busy schedule. My mind wandered to places it enjoys. I began to imagine whether I could weave textile to create my own clothes. What if I designed a tartan for the bélidor clan? What might a Haitian tartan look like? I could collaborate with my sister, an enthusiastic knitter, and together we could craft something, though I'm uncertain what it might be. I cannot encourage enough that you make sure you have a life outside of your work as a curator. In an essay in the Brooklyn Rail, I wrote that in his memoir, Stephen King wrote, quote, "If you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. If we don't have the time to live, where will we find the time to understand various lived experiences? How are you going to find different tools to share these stories? In our case, through exhibition making. It is vital to extend care to ourselves. It is through the wellness this fosters that we can work with intention. We're not giving from an empty well. Hopefully, this lecture provided you with examples of how curators have used various strategies to work with care. By inviting guests to share their knowledge and expertise, Geneviève Wallen opened curatorial practices to a wider public than the usual exhibition viewer. She cared for her guests, offering them a platform to disseminate how their experiences are creating new knowledges. In the same way, by extending care to me, by giving me a platform in which to do my work freely, Camille gave me the fuel to extend care to the artists I have worked with in traces that remain, and these traces will remain. The exhibition and performance were experiments in curating that I could only have done if someone cared enough for me to let me play. Through the exhibition, I was able to provide the artists with a space to expand their work, continue telling their stories, and touch a wider public. We were also able to gather, celebrate, have fun, which oftentimes are not things associated with our workplace. Then we talked about Joanna Joachin's exhibition, Estuaries and Black Eddy, where she spread the care by showcasing the often erased Black Canadian art history, and by doing so, gave the chance to many of us to see ourselves represented in the art milieu. Finally, it was important for me to mention that by having extracurricular activities like weaving and working out, I'm giving myself the tools to better care for myself and others. I hope what you get from this lecture is also you will have your own way of making curatorial work, but it will come from something you value deep inside. It will also get you to notice what the people you work with and surround yourself with care for, and if you want to align yourself with these values. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the beautiful lecture, Eunice. There's always something about exhibitions where there's community engagement, care, and love is part of it. And the fact that, like you are also speaking to the affective component of the visitors, the artist, and the curator yourself being part of it, it's just beautiful. So thank you so much. So I would like to introduce Joséphine Denis. Joséphine will join Eunice in a conversation very shortly. Joséphine, born in Haiti and raised in Prince and New York, is a curator and a writer. Her work advocates for Black diasporic art and encourages deeper engagement to foster a nuanced understanding of the specific contexts surrounding contemporary practices. Rooted in community dialogue, her work is guided by her kin. Joséphine is the director of curatorial initiatives at Band Gallery in Tech, Toronto. Recent exhibitions include Band at Art Toronto, where we dwell, inside the founders' collections, Band Gallery and the Arminidi Golding, The Comfort of Embers, the Power Plant Gallery of Contemporary Art. Denise's writing appears in various publications, and she has worked at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, SBC Gallery of Contemporary Art, Manpin Gallery, Serpent Galleries. So without further ado, Joséphine, I would like to invite you to join Eunice to the floor.
Hello, bonsoir. Thank you so much, Eunice.
Oh, you're welcome.
That was extremely generous and wholesome, and I've always admired the way in which you position yourself in a place of intentionality. And it's really empowering to see how you narrate your own practice. I think in a lot of ways, that's where we sort of lose our way sometimes, is by letting other people define what our experiences are.
Yeah.
There's so much about what you said, and I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to ask any of the questions that I said I would ask. So I'm going to completely, shift.
Can I just start by saying, when I had the keywords the values that influence my practice,
Yeah.
one word that I did not include was passion, and I feel like we're embodying this
Girl.
perfectly. So wanted to start with this.
I had to come correct,
Yes.
knowing that I was coming to be in dialogue with you. But I think maybe I'll just start also by grounding myself in the relationship that I've had with Eunice. I used to be in Montreal and work in Montreal, and so I met Eunice there. And I was part of BCF as well, so I was in conversations with you and Joanna and Geneviève, and having you there has made me feel more and more like this place could be home as an immigrant and in exile in different ways. But maybe I won't ask that many questions in case people have questions, and then maybe I'll circle back. But I think one of the questions that I would like to ask is around articulating your needs, articulating what you need from community. You've been through a lot and you've been able to sustain community, which for me, when I'm having a hard time, is what I have a hard time doing. I have a hard time sustaining community because I sort of go in my little corner. So how do you do that? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you advocate for what you need and sort of navigate feelings of shame and failure and foster community?
Yeah, it's not easy, but one thing that I realized really quickly is that if I don't do it, no one is going to do it. And so this was really the push for me to having to do it at all times, because when I started working in the field, I was always like viewed as an anomaly, like as if I was not going to last. But I mean, I really like being a curator. I think it's a cool job. And so in order for me to be able to sustain this as a way to live, I had to push through and to make sure that I could build the environment where I could do that work. But the more you advocate for yourself, the more people notice, and they want to be surrounded by that type of energy. And I'm also really good at creating boundaries, so that was also a way that I was able to express my need correctly, but also be able to understand if those boundaries are crossed, then this is not community happening. But it's something that took some time to build, different types of practices to build. And I like to think that it's really, when I was mentioning the different knowledges that Andrea and Geneviève were mentioning, all of the knowledge I accumulated by my experiences. So what could I use from my experience to keep going? So that's really how I was able to do it.
Because it's very different, right? Like articulating need and boundaries in community and then doing it institutionally, right? That's it, like, because there's a sense of trust that is in there as well.
For sure.
Can you speak about that difference and how that experience?
Well, the only way I can speak of that difference was when I was in a situation when I was not able to work through the communities that I was building or trying to build. There was a real clash with the institution that I was working for. And that's one thing too, is that I was not working with them anymore. I was working for them. And that's really when the shift happened. I'm like, okay, if I'm in a situation where I cannot do that work, then it's not the place for me to do that work. So it's also, it's tough because there's a lot of situations when you kind of have to stay in that environment, but I really believe in luck, so I feel like it's better for me to get away from those situations. But being an independent curator and being able to work on my own is also a way for me to build the kind of infrastructure that an institution already has, but for myself. And those are the ways I'm like, okay, I can, if this is the way I want to work, no one is going to tell me that I can't work in that way. And so this is the way that I keep like framing my work and building my work. So that allows me to work in community and to, yeah, to be able to curate in the way that I feel is more relevant for me and the artists.
Yeah, thinking through that it became really obvious to me when you were talking about your work at the MAI, how, you know, oftentimes institutionally, you really have to advocate for the work that you do. Like you have to justify your decisions, justify the artists that you want to bring in. And that again can be really rigid, right? What Camille said she works against. And so there's a balance to be had there when you think of curating as selection, as saying yes to some and saying no to some.
Yeah.
I remember when I did an exhibition in Montreal and a journalist asked me like, how do you find those artists?
Oh my God,
and,
yes.
And the way that you just mentioned it was what I was trying to articulate, but I don't think that I had done it well enough then, which is like, there is an organic way of creating an ecosystem that then lends itself to your curatorial practice.
Exactly, yeah.
But do you still feel like there's a power dynamic there? How do you feel, you know, because you are quite a public facing curator and people follow your work. And so how do you work in that way where in a way you've democratized your curatorial practice because it's community centered, but in a lot of ways there's some artists that might not have access to you directly that way. How do you deal with that?
It's an interesting question because when people ask me about why I removed the capital letters from my name, it really came from a time where I realized that there was a clear hierarchy between the curator and the artist, but there was a hierarchy that I was forced to feed into. And I was like, I don't, this is not the way I work because I'm also a huge fan of artists. And in a way, I view them as like the powerful, because without them, I would not be able to do my work. So because of that, I'm already in a position where I'm not looking at myself as the powerful figure choosing the artists. And that's also why I often talk about the fact that when I have an idea, the idea never comes only from within. It comes from the people I've worked with, the artists I talked to, the studio visits, the opening nights where there was no wine. And it's through those conversations that the exhibition happens. And because of that, although I do the job of a curator of like putting the ducks in the row, I don't feel like I'm like the umbrella overarching everyone. So I guess it's really just a matter of the perspective that I have on the work that I do.
Makes sense. Okay. I can keep asking questions, but we don't have that much time. Maybe I'll take like 2 questions at a time and try and re-articulate them and see, just so that anyone has any questions? Not yet? Oh, yeah, there's a question. Okay, and then you have to. Yeah. Okay, let's.
I got the mic first. What made me think about your practice is the important practice of studio visit. And the studio visit as a curator, I'm not getting as many invitations to do a studio visit. So I think it's important for artists to know that they should be extending an invitation to curators. But how do you go about maintaining that practice? Because it's easy to get lazy and just look online, right? So how do you implement your practice of studio visit? Because that's a huge important component of care, to actually meet face to face, to get to know somebody, a relationship. I think we had a studio visit for coffee, which was, you were like my therapist in that moment, but but I think it's an important thing that sort of is disappearing or is not elevated as much as it should be.
Yeah. I'm lucky enough because I'm visible. People do ask me people do invite me for studio visits, but also one of the keywords I have in my part of my values is domesticity, and I love going to people's houses. So for me, going to the artist studio is also a way to discover what is the thing that I'm not going to see by only going to see the exhibition? What is the book lying there? Where is the coffee cup? What is the half drink water? Those are the things that I'm interested in finding out. So that's why when I'm really interested in an artist, I'm like, "Ah, I should come over." So it's also because it's part of something that I'm so interested in. I feel like it's easier for me to just invite myself over to artist studios.
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Bonsoir Eunice, bonsoir Joséphine.
Ah,
I am of the strong opinion that there's no set definition of community. So when you mentioned community, I just wanted to add more to that. So I find that there's nothing wrong with being able to navigate different communities, as you said, Josephine, and being able to retreat to yourself. So as a curator, what would you say your definition of community is?
That's a good question. I recently I was on residency a few weeks ago with curators from the Caribbean, and we were talking about what are our needs in terms of that residency. And one of the curators was like, I hear you all talk about community, and it's making me feel a certain way because I feel like I don't know what community is or I don't have a community. And one thing that I was mentioning to her was that oftentimes people expect you to be a part of a specific community. Like, we're all Black curators, so people expect me to know every Black artist imaginable and to be in community with them. But it's not always happening, and it's not always even relevant to consider them to be a community. And so because because as a curator, I really see it as my job and not like my personality. I have communities in so many other places. I have family, I have chosen family, I have pet family, I have plant family. And those are the different microcosms that nourish how I view the professional community in which I'm working with. So to put a specific definition to what is a community, I would definitely use what I learned from quilting, which is to take the different parts of who you are to make a like a bigger image of your life. So yeah, I think that would be the way I define it.
yeah.
I had a question that you mentioned during the pandemic. Like you mentioned, you picked up quilting and weaving, and that helped you sort of connect with the artists you were collaborating with. Are there more such ways that probably you would suggest to people of connecting with the artists that you're representing or collaborating?
Yes, yes. So one thing that I remember is Joanna. She studied visual arts before going into museum studies. And I was always a little bit like envious because I'm like, she literally understands the work that she will put up on the wall. So if there's like a technical issue, she will get why it's a technical issue. Whereas I'm just like, ask the technicians, they know better than I do. So I think that if there is an artist that you're interested in their practice, look into understanding the actual vehicle of the practice and not just like the concept behind how they do their work. And also, if it's something that you've always wanted to try, if it's something that you're literally interested in, you should definitely check it out. And I mean, YouTube is also good for that when you look at people doing things. So those are the things that I would suggest if actually like paying for a class is not something you would do, I would do it in that way as well.
Yeah. Maybe.
Oh, I just want to thank you for sharing different strategy for your care practice and into your curatorial practice. I could feel that like you are really actually care in many different ways, and also I just wanted I wanted to re-mention the sentence that you said the articulating your needs and then sense of trust are very needed within the community. When like I just really struck by this sentence because I think this is not just happening in the curatorial practice, it's happening in life. And I just want to ask, like, how do you build trust, like in your practice or in your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if you also have an answer to that because I when I first entered the field, I was like, oh, everyone's friends, you know, we're artists, so you know, everyone is collegial. And then I noticed that it wasn't the case. And then I was really in like a trust no one, no new friends kind of vibe, which is I'm still a bit into. But it's really the affinities that you create with the people that will build that trust, and also the different ways in which you you meet each other. So if you notice that you are in a situation where you feel like you build affinities and there's trust going on, but the more you're in that relationship, the more extractive you feel it is, or you feel that the person needs you for specific things. Those are things that you will automatically feel, and you should definitely trust your gut on that. No one is going to tell you that someone is profiting off you, so you really need to trust it. And because because it's your job and not like your personality, you know that, you know, in that context you can be friendly, you can be professional, but at the end of the day they're not paying your bills, you know, they're not inviting you to dinner, so it will be easier for you also to separate that. That's one thing that I often like feel. If I need to have like, if I were to have a job on the side, I will teach people how to separate their professional life to their personal life, because it's really hard.
And especially in our field, I think when you start, like, we are interacting in so many contexts that don't seem professional. And again, because care is so important to what we do, we feel like we need to understand where someone is coming from always. And that's sometimes, you know, and then to be completely honest, like, there are parties, like, you know, it's just, there's so many, which is true, like, you have to be in so many different kinds of contexts that sort of take you away from professionalism in some sense, which is good, because if we're talking about rigidity and anti-capitalism, then that means we're also continuously redefining what it is to be professional with one another. But I think in terms of like trust and separating, I think one way to look at it is that you're not leading a relationship through assumptions, that you're able to communicate with people about their intentions, about with like clarity. And I think, you know, I say always in my bio that my practice is guided by kin, because I don't just work with like, and me too, I think of my practice as a curator as a writing exercise. And so I always say that, like, there are people around me who are my editors before I have a professional editor. Like, it's important to have peer-to-peer, but also intergenerational relationships where people can give you criticism so that you have a really good sense of where you are, because you have a trusted community around you that is not just telling you how good your work is, but is really enriching and keeping you accountable, and you're doing the same. And so, you know, being in community, just tying back to that question, it's not always easy. It can be uncomfortable, but knowing that that discomfort will not dissolve the relationship has a lot to do with trust as well. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Been waiting.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting talk and presentation. Question I have is freelance curating, because that must be can be pretty tough, I would imagine. And just wondered if it, your assignments and your work come largely from word of mouth, or you have to advertise, or, do a lot of social media, or what is involved? So that's my question. Thanks.
Yeah. I was asked recently if I enjoyed working independently, and there are some pros and cons, obviously, but one of the pro and con is that I am really my own PR person. I have to sell myself, I have to show what I do, I have to talk about my work a lot, which is not something that I'm used to doing. Like when I meet my friends, I talk about many other things than work, but then now I have to be like, oh, I'm working on this and I'm doing that to show that I'm still active. So that is definitely a part of it. Some of it has been invitation. So luckily I am well enough established, especially in Montreal, to be invited to curate exhibitions or to write article or to to sit on juries or do crits with MFA students. So a lot of that is through work that I've done with people previously that is just continuing. But a lot of time, especially if I want to work beyond Montreal, then I have to do a lot of like having to tell people to talk about me or like give a lot of examples of what I do so that people are aware that I'm not only working in Montreal. And I remember I came here in September for the Toronto Biennial, and we did all of the professional work. We visited the exhibition and I did all of that PR, and I knew a lot of artists, so it was kind of easy to do, but I put myself in a position to be introduced and do all of those things. But then at the end, there was a party and I wanted to dance, and everyone was doing the PR at the party. I was just like, guys, this is not the time. So sometimes I feel it's hard when I'm like the only one wanting to do other things than the professional aspect, but I also need to learn that, you know, I was also there in a professional setting, so the dancing was going to happen way after. So there's a lot of that that I still have to navigate as an independent.
Okay, we have 2 questions.
Hi. I'm working on a project right now around care for artists and cultural workers. And one of them is really focused on like the precarity of gig work. And I feel like as a freelance curator, you know something about that. So I'm wondering, sort of, who I work for has created like a fellowship for artists to come together and talk about the impact of the pandemic, how they got through it, and then envisioning a future, how to set things up so that something like a pandemic, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the impact is mitigated. So what, I just wonder, having lived through that and taking the kind of lessons from that, what would you say to that? What is your vision of a future where the harms of a catastrophe like a pandemic is mitigated and artists can be more resilient through that?
One thing that I openly say that is a regret in my life was that when I worked at the Onsite Gallery was when the pandemic happened. And what I wanted was for everyone to get paid and do nothing. I really wanted to close the gallery because there was no point in doing anything. But I knew my staff had, like, they needed to work. For them, it was important to be working in order to feel like they were doing something. So I had to create projects in order to make them do things. But one thing that I kept saying was well, hopefully, this was a very extraordinary situation that we may never recover from. We never, well, like we didn't know at that point. Everyone was dying, so we didn't know if we were going to be next. And so I think that one thing that I think is the most important is if you put value in your own personal life, everything else will come after that. But when you put when all of your energy is put towards, like, you know, capitalism and all of the external agents that are responsible for, you know, wars and genocide and everything, you're just feeding in something that you know is unhealthy and you know you are not even a part of. And my hope is that we recognize that there are moments when we can just chill It's not really easy to do or even to acknowledge, but that would be like my hope for the future, is that we understand that there are times to pause. Like I remember when during the pandemic they were saying like, oh, no one is traveling by plane, so now like blue whales are swimming freely, but there was a, why couldn't we use that moment to be like, oh, you know, the environment is regenerating now. If we had taken the time to rest and to regroup, look at everything we could have done right now with, you know, wars and politics. We would have had the mind space to work on that, but instead we were just like, we just needed to keep busy. And I feel like now we're trapped because we don't know how to get away from that system. Anyway, I could I can go over this for a while, but I hope I'm answering your question.
If I may add something in terms of like, I think you're a really great example of that. I think creating your own ecosystems is really important so that you're not relying on external ways of like generating opportunities. So whenever I speak to artists, even now, because depending on, again, what kind of communities you're from, but also how you're identified externally, it can be really isolating. And what that means is that you have to shift the way in which you relate to the sector and what it means to be successful in it. Collectives are really important. Networking is really important. Going to each other's studios, like knowing about other people's practices, learning in that way is a really, really good way of continuously imagining possibilities for yourself. And in that way, you're not as fixed in a space, right? I think the pandemic, that's what it did, is that for a lot of people, it felt like imprisonment, but even the way of experiencing that, not to dismiss anyone's experience, but could be seen as actually quite a privileged way of seeing it, because a lot of people already are isolated and can't move. And so there are different ways of looking at what it means to be free and to be able to move around and to be able to connect with people. Because for a lot of different countries, Haiti, where we're from included, we've been living in a pandemic state-like, right? So you have to learn from other places as well. Look outside of your own environment and see how, you know, those solutions are being imagined by places that, you know, have to come up with a way of having electricity for an exhibition, you know. I think there's one more, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, how do you maintain motivation in practicing weaving as a form of self-care when it's such a physically demanding and like time strenuous process? Like it takes so long and it's
Yes.
hard on your body. How do you maintain that motivation?
Well, I go to the gym and I work out. I said that previously, so that helps me manage the physical part of weaving. But for me, weaving does the complete opposite of what curating does. So because I'm often in my head and because a lot of the ideas, like creative work is a very hard work because you always have to generate something new. But weaving, it's one pedal and then the shuttle, and it's, you know, it's a repetitive movement that helps you like flush what being in your head would do a lot. So I would definitely say that the physical activity I engage in helps me have the strength to do the weaving. But right now, my biggest problem is I don't own my own loom, so I have to go places to do it. So doing that type of management, I don't always have the capacity to do it because my mind is occupied elsewhere. So when I get the opportunity, I jump on it, but I don't. It's not always easy for me to weave as much as I want to.
Okay, so maybe we'll conclude now. Thank you everyone so much for the questions. I'll conclude with two things. The first is I always love to finish a conversation by asking about future projects, so just so that we can manifest for you and root for you. So what are you up to and what can we look forward to?
So I really want you to look forward to me repairing my computer because I dropped I dropped some tea on it, and this month has been incredibly busy. So I've been working on a lot of different but very interesting things, and everything is now stuck on that computer, and I hope I get to have access to it. But one thing I'm working on is I have an exhibition at Clark in the spring.
Okay.
And I'm working with Stina Baudin and Paul Maeke.
Cool.
So I'm writing a grant to make sure that I can bring them to Montreal to install the work. And this exhibition is titled valediction, which is a word I recently got to learn. And the valediction is the closing sentence right before the signature of a letter. And what I think is beautiful about it is that you read it at the end of the letter, so then you have to go back to the letter to understand the intention of the signature. And also it just it calls for you to respond. And I'm really interested in this idea of how artists or how people communicate. And with the exhibition, the artists are using different ways of communicating, and that's why I'm trying to unlock. So that's happening in the spring. And I'm also, I keep working on the letter writing project, and now I've received the letters, and now I have to assess the information and then write my findings. And so that's a lot of what I'll be doing in the next months.
All right, positive thoughts, everyone. Let's support. Thank you again. I think what we've learned here as well is that we have to care for each other and not sit in silence when one of us voice out what our experiences are. Thank you for your courage, for your sincerity, for the way that you love.
Oh.
It's so boundless and radiating that yeah, it just shows in your practice.
Oh yeah, I'm glad.
I love the integrity. So yeah, I just want to make sure that as we think through what curating is, it's important to think about acknowledgement. How do we credit each other for the work that we're doing, and how we position our practice? And so this was a really great lesson in that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for all your questions and for your time.
Thank you, Eunice and Joséphine, for that beautiful conversation and the questions from our audience. So shortly, we do have a reception on the second floor of OCAD at the George Reed Studio. We do have some of our lovely student monitors in the hallway who will kindly point you to either taking the stairwell or the elevator. And I promise you, the food that we will provide tonight, top notch. Don't miss out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.